Hello and welcome to the first episode of How to Code in Python. This episode is going to cover installing all the software you need to have a pleasurable Python coding experience. The first thing you want to do is open your browser and go to python.org, and definitely not any other website because it could be a malicious version. Definitely don't go to python.com. I hear that has some really bad stuff on it. Click on the Downloads button on the python.org page, and then click Download Python 3.10.0. At the time you're watching this, a bug fix may have been released, but probably not. Now that you've downloaded it, you should navigate to your Downloads folder and double-click the Python 3.10.0 m64.exe. And this is the Python installer. First thing you need to do is uncheck the Install Launcher for All Users button, and then click Customize Installation. After that, in the next screen, just click through, but make sure your configuration is the same as the one I have. In the next screen, check the Add Python to Environment Variables box. Then change the data in Customize Install Location to C:\Python310, like I've done here. This is just for simplicity. Great, now you're ready to press install, so do just that. Great, now you've installed Python. First, let's get acquainted to some of the folders. Go to C/Python310, and you can see that there's these files. Don't delete any of them, as they're very important. The main folder you should be concerned about is the scripts folder. This is where your Python programs are supposed to go. And you may want to just drag it over and pin it to your quick access so you can get there quickly without having to click through all the folders. Great. Now you've become acquainted with the folders. However, we still have a problem. We have no way to edit our code. That's where Visual Studio Code comes in. It's a code editor, and it is incredibly versatile. And no, this is not an advertisement, and I'm not sponsored by them. It's just really good. So go to the page at code.visualstudio.com and press the download button. Go back to your downloads folder and double click on the latest download file. It has like a blue sort of shape. That's the Visual Studio Code installer. When you start it, agree to the license and press next. Then just click through the buttons until you get to one that says select additional tasks. There, check every box except register code as an editor for supported file types. Don't leave that one unchecked or uncheck it if it's already checked. Because if you do that, it will .py Python files will no longer be associated to actual Python and will instead be associated with the editor, which is not really what we want. It won't let the programs run properly. After that, you can just hit install. When Visual Studio Code is finished installing, launch it. There should be a screen for that at the end. After you start up Visual Studio Code, click the little squares thing on the left side of your screen, and that should bring you up to the extensions menu. Then click Python, and then click Install, and then it should just be a few minutes before it's finished. Now the Python extension for Visual Studio Code is finished. We have this little setup screen. Since we have already installed Python, we can click through that first checkbox and to select a Python interpreter. And it seems to have already guessed or found the thing we're using, so just click that. And now this first episode, installing all the software you need to have a pleasurable Python coding experience, is finished. Thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed. In the next episode, we'll be learning how to make our first program in Python. Hello, and welcome to the second episode of Learning to Code in Python. Today, we'll be learning about the print statement and how to make the infamous Hello World, or the first step on a programmer's journey. Hello World is a simple program that prints out a single line of text. Hello World. Now let's start up Visual Studio Code. When I started, I got this Python setup screen. This isn't supposed to happen, but if it happens to you, simply click Select Python Interpreter and select the Python 3.10 64-bit that I mentioned in the previous episode. When you dismiss that screen, if applicable, run the keyboard command Control-N. That creates a new blank file. Click Select Language and type Python into the search box and click it if you find it. Congratulations, you've now made a blank Python file. Now it's time to actually code it. Hello World in Python is actually just one line of code, which is one of the reasons why Python is so great. While other languages take up actually 5 or more lines of code to print a single line of text, Python just needs 1. To do that, we're going to use the print statement. To use the print statement, type the word print into the text box. After the word print, with no space, type an opening parentheses. Visual Studio Code should automatically fill in the closing one for you. Inside of those parentheses, put a double quotation mark. A second quotation mark should appear to the right of your cursor. Don't worry, this is intended. Between those two double quotation marks, type Hello World. Now it's time to save the file. Do Control-S and save it to the scripts folder, or any folder, but scripts folder is recommended. And call it something like helloworld.py. After that, press save. Now let's run it. Do the keybind Control F5 to run your program. A little box should pop up in the bottom of your screen, like here, and it should say Hello World. This is great. You've successfully finished Hello World and made your first Python program. The print statement in Python can be used to print more than Hello World. Change the data in between the double quotations, and Python will print out any text you want. Another way to run your programs is to go into the scripts folder or the folder that you saved them in. Then double-click on the file that you made, in this case, helloworld.py. A problem that you'll notice is that the window disappears right away and you can't really see what happened. However, there is a solution to this. In the text box of Visual Studio Code, on a new line, type input, followed by an opening and closing parentheses. This input can also be used to collect user input, but we're not going to do that now. The reason we're using input now is because it makes the user press enter before the program proceeds. Now let's run it. As you can see, Hello World stays on the screen, and you need to press Enter before the program proceeds and promptly exits. Congratulations! You have now learned how to make a Python program in Visual Studio Code. You've also learned the print statement in Python and the input statement to press Enter before the program proceeds. Thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed. Hello, and today, as the third episode of Learning Python, I'm going to teach you about comments and docstrings. Let's start by opening a file. Navigate to the folder that you saved your files in last time and right-click on them. In the menu that pops up, there should be an option, Open with Code. Click it. When Visual Studio Code opens up, your code should be there, but there should be a blue bar that says Restricted Mode. Click the Manage button near it and click Trust, and then go back to your program by clicking its tab with a name. The first thing I'll teach you about today is comments. Comments are used in Python by having a hashtag, or a pound symbol, or a number symbol, or whatever you want to call it. After that, type whatever text you want, numbers, anything. And that's a comment. Comments don't do anything in your code. Your code will run the same with or without comments. However, comments do explain things. They explain how your program works, how it's meant to be used, etc. Comments can also be put at the end of any line of code. This also does not affect how the code runs. The other thing that I will be teaching today is docstrings. Docstrings are like comments, except they take up multiple lines and are used to provide a more detailed explanation of the program as a whole. To make one, type 3 double quotes on the same line with no other text and press Enter twice. And then the space in between these two sets of 3 double quotations, input the text you want there to be in the docstring. It's good practice in the Python coding language, or any coding language for that matter, to include some comments to explain what your program does, how it does it, etc. What I have here is maybe a bit too detailed, but it explains what it does. And now, Bad Practices Programmer presents Commenting Too Much. That was long. As you can see here, there's a ridiculous amount of comments for this short program. Over-commenting is bad because it makes it hard to follow your project because there's so much rambling. And that concludes the third episode of How to Code in Python, Comments and Docstrings. Thank you for watching. Hello, and welcome back to the fourth episode of How to Code in Python. Today's episode is a big one. Going to be learning about integers, strings, variables, math, and input. If you didn't know what I just said, that's fine. In previous episodes, I've said input will be soon. And yeah, this is it. Before we learn about input, though, we have to learn about variables. Think of a variable like a box. And the box has a name. For example, spam. And the box can have text or numbers or anything in it. That's a variable. To declare a variable, put the name you want the variable or the box to be, followed by an equal sign. After that, put whatever you want the box to have. In this case, we're going to put a string in the box. A string is text. Anything that you can type is a string. However, strings need to be inside of quotation marks. Make sure to have quotation marks when assigning the variable, just in this case, if your variable is a string. Assigning a variable has no output, so just assigning a variable does not print anything out into the console. Variables can also be set to numbers. Numbers shouldn't have quotation marks. Otherwise, they'll be treated as a string, not a number. Numbers are called integers in Python. To output a variable onto the console, you use the print function that you learned in episode 2, Hello World. However, when you want to print a variable, you shouldn't have quotation marks. So inside of the parentheses, just put the name of the variable that you want to print out. In this case, spam. When you run it, it prints the contents of spam, not the word spam. It prints the contents of spam because earlier you set the value of spam to 77 or whatever you want it to be. Now on to input, the thing you've probably been waiting for. In previous videos, I've used input to force the user to press enter to proceed. But input can also be used to collect user input. To begin, you have to assign it to a variable, in this case x. So at the beginning of the line, before the input, put x and then equals. So this stores whatever you put into the input and then press enter. Whatever you put in it is stored into the box or variable x as a string, which means text. Inside of the parentheses of input, you should put the prompt. The prompt is what you ask the user. For example, what is your name? In this case, since we're inputting a string, you need to put quotes around that. Now we have a program that collects the user input, but it doesn't do anything with it. It just sits there. So why don't we print it out using the print function? Do that, put print, and then inside, in quotes, as before, type your name is. And then on the outside of those quotes, but not outside the parentheses, put a comma, and then eggs. Lovely. Now we can run it. As you can see, the program asks, what is your name? And I can type in my name here. And when I press enter, it says your name is, and then whatever I put in here. If you don't like math, then you're in luck. Python can do mathematical functions with variables. Here I have two variables set up, spam and eggs. Spam is equal to the number 10 and eggs is equal to the number 15. And I want to add them together. So to make a new variable with the combined value of them, type the name of whatever variable you want the answer to be, in this case ham, equal sign, and then put the name of the first number, spam, then a plus symbol, then eggs, or the second number. And then the value of ham will be the combined number value of spam and eggs. You probably want this program to print out the value for you. To do that, just put the name of the variable in between the parentheses. In this case, ham, because that is the combined value of spam and eggs, as shown on line 3. And when you run it, you can see it prints off 25, which is 10 plus 15. Another way to add them together is to add the two variables together right within the print statement by having spam plus eggs without quotes inside the print statement. Something you should watch out for is that you don't try to add together an integer or the number and a string or the text. because if you do, Python will throw an error. Remember, use a plus symbol for adding, use a dash for subtracting, use an asterisk or a star for multiplication, and use a slash for division. And that concludes the 4th episode of How to Code in Python. In this episode, we learned about variables, how to collect user input, and how to do some math with Python. I hope you enjoyed, and thank you for watching. Hello, and welcome back to the 5th episode on How to Code in Python. Today, we're going to be learning about lists. Last episode, I told you about integers and strings. Integers are numbers, and strings are anything else. However, you can set a number as a string if you use quotations. There is a third type of data in Python called lists. The description of lists are in the name. Lists can be lists of integers, strings, or different combinations of the two. Declaring a list is like declaring any other variable. You begin with the name, in this case, my list, followed by an equal sign, followed by whatever you want it to contain. However, lists are special. To declare a list, after the equals, you need to have a set of square brackets. Visual Studio Code should automatically fill in the brackets for you. Inside of those brackets, put the first item of the list. In this case, the string apples. To make another thing in the list, exit the quotation marks. If you put a string in, put a comma, and then put the next value in between the comma and the closing parentheses. I'm going to add 2 more. Bananas and mangoes. To print out a list, print it out how you would any other variable. Just do print, and then inside of the parentheses, put the name of the list, in this case, my list. When you run it, it prints off the items in the list, including the square bracket. Say you want to only print off one item in your list. In Python, there's something called list indexes. Everything in your list has an index, starting from 0 and going up with 1. Apples is 0, bananas is 1, mangoes is 2, and so on. To print off only one, at the inside your print statement, after my list, but before the closing parentheses, put a set of square brackets, and inside of those square brackets, put the list index of whatever you want to print out, in this case, 0. And list index 0, running it will print out just apples, or whatever you set as the first thing in your list. I've added 2 more values to my list, cherries and papaya. These have index numbers 3 and 4, respectively. But what if you want to just print out more than one, but not all of the items in the list? Say just values apples, bananas, and mango. To do that, you see the 0 in between the square brackets down at the print. After that, put a colon, and then find the index of the last thing you want it to print out, and then add 1 to that. In this case, mangoes, the last thing you want it to print out, is index number 2. Add 1 to it, 3. So it should say print my list, and then square brackets 0, 3. When you run it, it prints out apples, bananas, and mangoes. But what if you want to reassign a single value on your list without redefining the entire list again? Don't worry, Python can do that. On a line, after the original definition of the list, but before the print, type out my list, and then make a set of square brackets with no space between my list and the square brackets. But I want to overwrite mangoes into oranges. So, since that's in index 2, in the square brackets after my list on the new line, type 2, because that's the index we want to overwrite. After that, on the outside of the square brackets, put equals, and then the data we want it to have. In this case, oranges. Of course, put that in quotations because it's a string. And when you run it, you can see that it prints out the list, but the middle value, or index 2, is oranges, like shown on line 3. And that concludes episode 5 of How to Code in Python. In this episode, we learned what lists are and how to use them. Thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed. Hello, and welcome back to the 6th episode of How to Code in Python. Today we'll be learning about loops. Loops are very important in Python because you get to repeat code a certain amount of times instead of copying and pasting. There are 2 major types of loops: for loops and while loops. And we'll be covering all of them. Let's begin with for loops. For loops have 2 subtypes: for range loops and for list loops. Let's begin with for range loops. Timmy has a problem. He invited 50 people over to his house for a party. He wants to greet them all and tell them which place they were. It takes too long to copy and paste 50 different versions of this code. So that's where a for range loop comes in. To declare a for range loop, type for I in range, and then a set of parentheses. Inside those parentheses, put 50, or the amount of times that you want to loop the loop. Then on the outside of the parentheses, put a colon, and then press enter. You should notice that your cursor is now tabbed, or a bit indented, by exactly 4 spaces, or 1 press of the tab key. However, the code that you want to loop is not. To tab it all in, highlight the part of the code that you want to tab and press the tab key. Visual Studio Code automatically tabs them in. When you run it, it prompts you to press enter. When you do that, it counts up by 1 and prints out where you are on the list. And it does that all the way up until 50, at which point it exits out and closes the program. Now on to the next type of loop, for list loop. For list loops are similarly designed to for range loops, except they utilize lists that you would have learned about in the last episode. Here we have a list, and I'll explain how the syntax for a for list loop works. The for list loop syntax goes for blank in list. So the blank is sort of the variable that you want each item in the list to be called as it passes through the loop. So how it works is for every item in that list, each time it goes through the loop, it takes out one item starting from the first one, and that's whatever the item is called, that first blank. And the second one is the list, or whatever list that you want to take this data from, in this case, my list. Here's the finished version. As you can see when I run it, it prints off every item in the list in order, but without the square brackets and quotations. Now on to while loops. While loops are loops that run while a variable is in a certain state, like below 10. Here's an example. The variable gets 1 added to it each time, and when it gets to 10, it exits. You can also do while something equals this, or while something is this, but make sure to use a double equals when comparing. For example, while x equals 0. And that brings us to our final loop, the infinite loop. Infinite loop are similar to while loop, except there's no variable. Just have while true with a capital T followed by a colon. And then this will execute the code that's in it infinite times. Unlike other loops, this should be avoided most of the time, because otherwise this might happen. that's why you shouldn't run infinite loops for too long. And that concludes the 6th episode of How to Code in Python. In this episode, we learned about many different types of loops, most good, some bad. Thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed. Hello, and today, as the last episode of How to Code in Python, just the basics, I'm going to be teaching you about if-else statements. So essentially, these are things that tell the computer, if this happens, then do this. And there's an optional statement, else, so if it doesn't, then it goes ahead and does that. Alright, so say you're the owner of some adult website and you want to prevent kids from coming on your site. And how you do that is you ask for user input. And you want to see if the age they input is higher than 18. Let's begin by asking for user input, and then that's where if-else statements come in. So to do it, type if, and then space, and then x or whatever variable you want to check, and you want to see if it's higher than 18. So put a greater than symbol with the open end facing towards the x, and then another space, and then let's put 18 because that's the restriction. And then put a colon, and then press enter. And then do whatever code you want if it's good. And you can put an else, so back in the after it, but not tabbed, put else, and then a colon, and then on the new tabbed line, put whatever you want. In this case, you're too young or whatever. If you run it, you can see that we run into an error message here. This is because inputs are stored as a string or letters, and we're trying to compare it to a number. And letters and numbers can't really be compared that well. That's where the int function is. The int function converts whatever variable is placed inside its parentheses into an integer. In this case, you want to switch whatever the string we got from the input into an integer that can be compared. To do that, use the int function. Let's assign it to the variable x, so it'll just overwrite itself. X equals int, and then set a parentheses and init x, because we want to overwrite the existing value of x with the integer form of x. Now when I run it, and I type in an age, press enter, it gives me an applicable result. But what if you want to compare a different value? That's where elif comes in. So say you want to make sure there are no people 4 years old or under, or make a custom value, or a custom response, that is. So to do that, type elif, and then x, and then less than 4, and then colon, and then let's just put, how did you even get here? Because most 4 and under wouldn't be able to operate a computer properly, let alone navigate to this obscure adult website. Now, I don't recommend that you go to adult websites, because they're bad. You can even add multiple elifs, but make sure to order them from largest comparison to smallest comparison. So, like, if you are wanting to see if a person is older than 1,000, put that before you see if a person is older than 18. And that actually concludes not only the episode, but the entire series. I really hope you enjoyed this, and I really hope you learned some Python code. This is, lots of stuff that you've learned here. And yeah, go out and code. Thank you for watching. And once again, I hope you enjoyed.